Hello, my name is Vanessa Clarke, a climate tracker fellow hailing from Nassau, the Bahamas, and I'm here to share a bit on my three-part series on Hurricane Dorian's indelible mark, 5 years after the storm. I was pretty nervous going into this series. My mentor and I felt like it was the obvious choice to tackle, but we decided to approach it through personal experiences, which made the process a bit daunting. My goal was to gather different perspectives for each story, bringing in not just expert voices, but also first-hand accounts. In the first article, I featured a friend of mine, Shavante Nixon, whom I met last year while working with a filming crew. Shavante has a bubbly, engaging personality, and when we got to talking, she gave me the cliff notes of her ordeal, surviving Hurricane Dorian with her family. Her story became the anchor for the first piece, which also included insights from environmentalists. The focus was on Abaco, where she's from, and how the storm impacted those like her. The second article shifted to Iram Lewis, a former member of parliament and resident of Grand Bahama, the other island severely hit by Dorian. His perspective on how Grand Bahama has coped and the ongoing response to the hurricane shaped the direction of this part of the series. The third and final article looks into the mental health crisis that still lingers, particularly for Dorian survivors. With hurricane season back again, and the Bahamas being in peak hurricane season, there are also many triggers for those who lived through it. This piece explores how the trauma remains a part of everyday life for many in the Bahamas. I'm really excited to have completed this series, and I hope it begins to shed light on the ongoing recovery and emotional resilience of those affected by Hurricane Dorian. For many, Dorian is now a core memory, one that can only be bested over time.
All right, for another episode of the Caribbean Climate Calabash Podcast. I'm your host and editor, Gladstone Taylor. And today we have with us journalist or Climate Justice Fellowship, which is, Climate Tracker's flagship journalism mentorship program. And she's from the Bahamas. We have with us Vanessa Clarke. How are you today, Vanessa?
I'm good. It's hot, but I'm good. I can't complain.
Yeah, no, the heat. Trust me, the heat is. Yeah, I can imagine. It's funny because you never think. You never think. I hear that it is particularly hot in the Bahamas. I've stopped by there maybe a year or two ago and kind of felt it myself. So yeah, I have an idea, but I can imagine it's probably worse now.
Yeah, we are experiencing, well, we've been having heat waves coming in and out. And so some days it'll be like 90 degrees, but it feels like 102.
Mhm.
And so they'll send out these alerts to say, stay hydrated, just keep drinking water, don't
Yeah.
be outside if you don't have to be outside. Um, a lot of people think that because we're north, and really and truly, if you go along the archipelago, you will
Mhm.
feel the heat difference. So it's
Mhm.
way more warmer in Inagua, which is one of our most southern islands. And if you go to Freeport or the Abacos, which are the most northern islands, you will experience cooler temperatures.
Uh,
But New Providence,
yeah,
Andros,
that's where I was.
everybody in between, you will still feel that relative heat. So
Heat,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, no, that's crazy. Um, but yeah, let's just get a little bit into it. But first, we should kind of start with an icebreaker. One of the things that we like to have on this podcast is what are you watching right now? Um, it could be as I mean, the most common thing is like series these days. So if it's a series, that's okay. But if it's a film or docu-series or documentary,
So I'm in between. I like period pieces.
Mm.
So I am rewatching something called Penny Dreadful, and it's a
Oh
period
yeah,
piece from based in London
yeah,
about uh, this lady. I guess she's a witch, and there are all
mm,
these different people coming after her.
yeah.
Um, but Dame Maggie Smith just died a couple of days ago,
Yeah.
and I'm always a fan of her. And so I'm now starting to binge watch Downton Abbey again. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, she was a really brilliant actress. Um,
Mm,
she was in the Harry Potter series. That's what a lot of people know
yeah.
her from. She
Yeah.
was also when I was a teen. She was in Sister Act,
Mm,
the film franchise.
yeah.
But Downton Abbey, I think, is some of her best work. So yeah,
Yeah, no, I mean, I know Penny Dreadful. I would describe it as a horror series. There are not many people I
it
can
is.
recommend it to you that can handle it.
No,
It gets very dark. It's
it
actually,
does.
and I think it's sad that because the production on that was really great. Like just this, even the sets, the costumes, the
Yeah,
designs and stuff like that. Special effects for some of the creatures, really good. And
yeah.
yeah, it's sad that they took it off here. But probably because it was just too dark, one of those
It
things.
was. It is. It can get very very dark,
Yeah,
and you can question yourself sometimes when you're watching it. But
yeah,
it's also very addictive. So I like it. Yeah.
yeah,
So that's
yeah.
what watch it.
All right. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those things that I watched back in the day that I reserve. Like if sometimes I get asked for recommendations because I watch a lot of stuff. Um, uh, yeah, it's one of those that I recommend. Oh, it's like one of those books, like in the way in the back that you only give to someone who's dared enough
Yeah.
to, like, you know, yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, I've been watching Rings of Power, Lord of the Rings, big fan of that. So yeah, TV, television is getting up there now with film.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's a good time to love stories.
Yeah.
Um,
It is.
so yeah, let's get a bit into your professional history. Um, your time. How did you get started in the media community space? Was the journalism part of it immediate, or did that come afterwards? And what was that like? What initiated that?
So when I was 13, I wanted to be an astronaut. I was fascinated with the stars, sky, how things worked up there. And my grandaunt, who I used to live with, she was very, very supportive of my endeavors. And she actually called a cousin of ours in
Mhm.
Florida to find out what would need to happen in order for me to become an astronaut. And one of the requirements way back then was you had to have 20/20 vision. Obviously, I don't. I wear glasses. LASIK surgery was also not something that was a thing back then. It was
Mhm.
very dangerous. And
Yeah.
so, pretty much my aspirations to be an astronaut were dashed completely
Mhm.
against the wall. I was distraught. Um, and so I had to figure out what else I wanted to do because age 13, you have it in your head, you're going to go up into the air and you're going to defy all odds. And so I couldn't figure out what I wanted to be until I hit maybe 17, was getting ready to graduate from high school. And I always had a knack for writing. Um, and so when I went to the counselor's office, when I got accepted to the College of the Bahamas, um, I had a rough time figuring out what I wanted to be. And the counsel was like, well, it boils down to letters and numbers.
Mhm.
What do you prefer? What are you
Better at,
comfortable
yeah.
being with? And I said, well, I was always better at letters than numbers. So let's
Mhm.
go with that. And she gave me the different tracks. And I also happen to be a very, very factual person. Maybe it's eldest child syndrome. Um, I deal with facts, everything's black and white. I don't need the nuances. Let's figure out the nuances after we get all the facts. And so
Yeah, it makes sense.
journalism seemed to be the best track.
Mhm.
So this is 1998. I got my associates in 99 and in 99. Journalism, went to FAMU, Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida. Got my bachelor's in print journalism because back then there was no such thing as convergence or
Mhm.
digital media. I'm
Digital, yeah.
literally 1 year older. When I was in college, Facebook was a swipe left, swipe right dating app.
Thing,
It
yeah.
didn't exist the way it is now. We had MySpace, Black Planet, High Five. Um, and these things were very, very new. So they
Mhm.
weren't in the journalism realm yet. So I
Yeah.
graduated in 2004 with this wonderful print journalism degree. And then 4 years later, this term called convergence comes along and it throws everybody into the deep end of the ocean because we now have to adapt to
Mhm.
the digital aspect of journalism being a thing. Um, so I functioned primarily as a cub reporter, writer for maybe first 7 or 8 years. Um, and I was actually thrown not into um, traditional newspaper, which is what I was trained in. I actually got thrown into magazine when I first came out
Um,
of college. So I had to learn how to expand my writing after being taught how to contract it for such a long period of
yeah.
time. So that was
Yeah.
fun. That was a whole lot of fun. And then I had to learn how to write for the digital realm at the same time.
Mm.
And then it was, oh, well, Vanessa, you need to learn how to do everything because if not, you're going to get left behind. So then I had to learn how to write for broadcast. Um, and so
Yeah.
I was writing for maybe like 10, 12 years. And then I became an editor. And then I left mainstream media for a time. And I was functioning as a communications specialist and a
Mm.
communications coordinator. Um, and I've switched fields over the last 24 years from mainstream journalism to architecture to fashion. Um, and most recently, in the last 5 years, what got me into environmental journalism was 5 years ago, I was attached as a comm specialist with our Ministry of Public Works for an integrated coastal zone management project. And I had to now learn all these different concepts about
Mhm.
coastlines and coastline erosion
Yeah.
and how things damage, how our country is vulnerable and how things get damaged and how things renew themselves over periods of time. And
Mhm.
learning why you're not supposed to rip out things from the coastlines because when you rip out those plants, you now are causing more harm than doing good,
Yeah.
not just to the land, but also the sea, you
I
know.
see,
And
yeah.
so um, after that, I moved into a project with our Ministry of Health uh, that spoke to climate change and health and how climate change is impacting um, us on different levels and how marginalized communities are affected by climate change and what can be done. And so being away from writing for that long period of time, what I also realized in working on these projects was that a lot of people in my country still don't have a grasp on what these concepts are.
Mhm.
And so it felt like it was a good time to get back to basics, to helping people um, understand the fundamentals of what's going on around them. You know, you talk to the average Bahamian, they'll tell you, okay, our thing is hurricanes. You know, California has earthquakes. Mid US has tornadoes. We have hurricanes. And you ask people all the time, you know, which natural disaster would you rather be around? And I told people, man, hands down, a hurricane. A hurricane gives me 2 to 3 days head up. Worst case scenario, if we got to evacuate, you get to leave. Some people are always stubborn. They want to stay home and see what they could protect, but you get that heads up with a hurricane in most
Yeah.
cases. Some cases you don't. But for the most part, it is what it is. But being able to educate people and talk to them about the different aspects of their immediate surroundings, what works, what doesn't work, what they should know, or
Mm.
what they should do. I think that's what sparked me going back to basics, back to writing, as opposed to seeing everything the the grand scheme, from the seeing the big picture. In order for the big picture to work, you still got to go back to basics and plug in the small things for people, and
Yeah, for
that's how
sure.
you get them on board.
Mm.
And so that's what drew me to the fellowship, and that's what um, has me involved back with writing again.
Yeah, that's good. And I mean, I feel like it's like the challenge of our age, honestly, is like translating some of this stuff is a lot of it is really dense and very interconnected, and it affects our lives so much as people living in the Caribbean because so much of our livelihoods are outside, as we always say. Um, but there's so few people that truly understand what's happening or how what they're experiencing is a result of what's happening. So it definitely is the challenge of the age, I think, communication, because it's one of those things that it's vital. Like people need to understand it. People we need to. There are things that we need to do to survive what's happening and be ready. Um,
Mhm.
but just the fact of maybe it's because it's so dense, maybe it's because it's coming from scientists and so super academic. I don't know. Maybe it's because it sounds like an agenda that some people are pushing.
Yeah,
Those things make it a little harder to kind of communicate because and you're having the conversation already. They're telling you what's happening to them. It's climate change,
yeah,
and but to broach the conversation and even to get to a place in the conversation where you know that if you leave them with something that they can build on. Um, just to even it's difficult because sometimes it feels like they're rejecting um, um, the thing. So there's a lot of challenges with it. Sometimes we talk about it here on this podcast, and we all kind of try to put our brains together to find ways. A part of it is, as you said, in the smaller details, like helping the regular person to understand, how things like the increase in heat, the fact that it takes more water to sustain a plant than it did back in the day, the fact that some plants need shelter now and you can't, um,
hmm
the fact that we're struggling to produce, we're consuming more than we produce in terms of agriculture. A large part of the decrease in that kind of production is related to climate change and the fact that it's harder, to grow things um, without making those connections for people in a way that they understand. Then,
yeah.
yes, it's going to be difficult, but that's a large part of it. And we're glad to have you back on board
I
to
think
help
I think
us
the one
through this
thing,
great challenge.
yeah, the one thing that stuck with me from college up till now was one of my professors who said, whenever you're writing, you have to appease everybody. So the best way to do that is to write to the eighth grader without insulting the PhD.
Mm.
And because at the end of the day, everybody who, even people who've gone off to college, university, and gotten advanced degrees, they're advanced in their fields. They're not advanced in everything else. So their brains are moving in one direction towards what they do, and it's regressing um, for whatever reason. And it's just human nature. You focus on one thing, you neglect something else. So, in order to break things down for them, you've got to go back to basics and fundamentals and break things down. Um, because what I find sometimes when talking to scientists and having laymen in the same space, they're actually saying the exact same thing. And they're arguing about it because they're using different words, you know? And it's up to us to take those words and make them more palatable for everybody else. So everybody across the board can understand and be on the same page. And I think that's why people think things are quote unquote agendas because of the words that are being used. Because there's an easier way to say something. And I tell people all the time, if you can explain what you're trying to say to me, like I'm a 4-year-old, then I can explain it to everybody else. If you can't explain to me what you're saying, then do you even know what you're saying?
Understand? Yeah, you probably don't understand it that well then.
Yeah, so once you can break your stuff down, then I can break it down for everybody else just a little better, and weave these words together to make everybody get on the same page. And that's the goal. The goal is to make sure everybody has equal footing. So yeah.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, no, I mean it but yeah, as I was saying, it is good to have you back on board. We need as many people as we can to help. And I think the work America does with journalists in trying to support, it's not, even if we can't hire a newsroom full of people, support other people that are already in newsrooms to kind of their focus in this field. And a large part of the breaking down. Yeah, I can understand too when these experts they get to a certain level of doing, and it's almost like they disconnect from how to communicate it, in and I think even layman's it's people say like historically it has this connotation or negative connotation, but I think it's again, as you said, if you a real markup when you understand something, you can really distill it, and sometimes that takes a lot of time, because you can understand it, and there are many ways to understand something from. So you can understand this perspective, or probably a studied perspective. But I think that when you spend more time with it and you see how it translates from other perspectives or from other viewpoints, that helps you to get to that place where you're able to distill it into something that's simpler. But yeah, speaking of that, tell us a bit about your story, the one that you talked about. But before we get into that, as you were saying, to words, writing is your thing, and most in that space, you've done some broadcasting as well. But the digital age, as you were saying, this convergence, it's putting us into a place where a lot of our job and responsibility too, outside of breaking it down, is making some of this stuff accessible. Podcast to me is one of those ways. When we just started, it was just up, and it was on Spotify and Apple Music. But the thing about accessibility nowadays is that most people are on YouTube. So you can put something, you can put audio up on YouTube, which I think some people do that. But we just decided to kind of switch to video, people something to look at, make it a little bit more accessible. I think that's also part of our job too. But it can be very challenging for a lot of us who are used to, or who are more skilled in the writing. And I find that a lot of our fellows have that challenge. I have that challenge still, even though I work in multimedia. Tell us a bit about your experience with
I am not a fan of being on camera.
it.
I am not a fan. I am not a fan of
Yeah,
any camera or any audio.
yeah.
I tend to have full on
But the
panic
story
attacks.
was so good that you did. The audio was so good.
Yeah, after like 15 tries. Because again,
Yeah.
and you back in college, I had the option to choose between broadcast and print.
Mhm.
Print print is a safe space. Print
Yeah.
is a comfort zone. And I find that even now I'm challenged all the time to go into this broadcast space, this space of being exposed. And it's nerve-wracking. It
Mhm.
it totally freaks me out.
Mhm.
And that was like, here's the thing. I found out about Climate Tracker Caribbean during its first iteration.
Mhm.
And when I found out that there was a, a component that required digital, I was like, oh no, I'm not doing this. It's not gonna happen. And it took a friend of mine coaxing me. She's like, just do it, do it for the challenge. And I signed up knowing that I would still have to do this broadcast piece. And I'm grateful to you guys for pushing me and forcing me to do it, because if there was an option for me to just do all print, I would have gone with that option. And I promise you, I I have had to go back and forth with myself just to make sure I got things done, um, so I can finish off. And yeah, once you do it the first time, it it's not as scary anymore.
Yeah, I guess that was easy.
But there there's still a fear there. There's still an apprehension there. Um, like I did not want to do this because I'm like, this
Yeah,
means I have to be on camera. And I'm like,
yeah.
it's a lot. It's a lot.
Um,
Um,
yeah.
and I keep, I had to get myself out of saying I'm too old for this. I'm the oldest person in the cohort. I just get myself out of it, because age is relative.
Mhm.
Um, and it's how you feel. And I don't feel as old as I am until I get in front of a camera or in front of a microphone. And then I'm like, I'm too old for this mess. I need to just go
No,
back to being a consultant
but the
and
thing
get
is, the funny thing is, sharing your experience there, I was like, yo, this would be, and that's the thing that I find, and that's why I challenge um, the fellows this season to try their hand, see in what way they could do it that they would be comfortable, but to still just to try it, because I think that a lot of us have stories that, regardless of where we publish, or whatever we write, I think it's we have the opportunity in this digital age as well, in the age of social media, to share these stories with at least the people that are closest to us, the people that are actually following us. Um, and that opportunity is something that we should take up more, even if it's not like professionally. Try to do it in a very low pressure way, so that it's like it feels like you're sharing these stories. No one is forcing you. No one is telling you it has to be, you know, 5 minutes or whatever. But I think even with yourself, when you shared some of that history about that transition from, going to college, um, to and studying journalism in print, and then, graduating with your finding out that, yeah, we're going in a new
a
sort of
different
media.
direction. Yeah.
Yeah. that is like important context that a lot of us are missing from these conversations, you know, and I think it enriches, it helps to enrich and it helps to inform the entirety of the, even though it's not about climate change in particular. These things help to, yeah, to humanize the stories as well, that help people to understand that it's someone, it's someone who is just learning about it a couple years ago, like you know, we may have done a lot of like extensive research, produce proper reports with facts because integrity and responsibility, and you know, but at the same time, we are not a part of an agenda, and I think, you know, these stories like the one you shared, things that help to enrich our storytelling, it helps to also engender trust in our art. So I think that stuff is important. That's why I always encourage all fellows to, after they've tried their hand, to see if you can find a way, you know, a low pressure way that's comfortable for you. Because yeah, it's, you know, even if it's just sharing with people, that's, I guess, um, yeah, we need that, and it's about personalities. Because you know, we already have the media, we already have people in broadcast doing what they do.
Mhm.
As writers too, we have this kind of um, maybe it's a grasp of narrative that people who are just reading the teleprompters, actual broadcasters, might not have. But yeah, those things can help us to tell a more human story, and give people a personality follow, to help follow these stories, rather than it just being news, you know, Channel 5 news every day telling them about climate change, you know. So yeah. So I hope you take the challenge. Take courage.
Yeah, y'all had me do my very first TikTok.
Yeah.
Y'all had me do my very first IG live.
Mhm.
So there were a lot of firsts with Climate
Yeah.
Track Caribbean for me. And I'm really grateful for that. Taking me out of my comfort zone. Because that's what it was. The
Yeah.
first three articles were and I even think I did those wrong because, and again, I guess this tells my age bracket, because investigative journalism to me is something that you're you're sitting in that piece for several weeks, and in some cases several months, and you are interviewing way more people than you need to for the piece, and you're entrenched in it, and you're giving these recounts that seem, in some cases, depending on the subject matter, larger than life. Um,
Mhm.
and so my pieces went a little over in terms of word count, like to the
Mhm.
point where I cut down, my mentor and I had to cut down my first piece in half because I think I'd written like over 2,000 words.
Yeah.
And the entity here, Eyewitness News, who was carrying it for me, they were like, no, Vanessa, we have a 1,000 word limit. This is way too long.
Yeah.
And so I guess I got carried away. So I had to reel it back in. But the problem is, the piece that I was writing about is something that's still lingering and affecting people today.
Mhm.
Um, and so it was hard, um, confining something that needed to be told on from different angles and by different people, confining it to a word count. Um,
Mhm.
and so that proved to be its own challenge, but it was still, in the grand scheme of things, easier than me manning up and actually getting in front of a camera to talk to somebody for 30
Yeah,
minutes. So yeah.
yeah, completely understand because yeah, those longer formats, there's space for them as well, and I
Yeah.
think in general that's how investigative journalists work. It's just unfortunate that with these newsrooms, they have because even me, I'm just now getting to I freelance a lot, so
Hmm.
I tend to kind of work on my own. Sometimes it's like 2 months. I've worked on stories that have taken me 6 months.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I'm working with some people now where I'm producing 1 or 2 stories every month,
Hmm.
and that has been challenging. But it's it's been a good experience because, and in a way it's kind of been a little bit better in terms of because I still do long-term stuff for other people and every now and again, and that might take me. They'll be like, just however long it takes you to
Hmm.
finish, we'll take it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's good for me to get that um, 1 or 2 every month, getting into that zone because yeah, I couldn't work in a newsroom, which is like
No.
much more high pace. But for sure, in terms as journalists, like obviously we have bills to pay and we need to make money. So
Yeah.
I realized too when I was looking back at some of my past stories that were taking like 6 months and whatever, I ended up with money and in some cases not making a profit from the endeavor because it took me so long to get it done and then eventually get paid after I get it done. So, it's tricky, but it's good to have those on your agenda. It's good to place where even if you have other jobs, because I know some journalists have other jobs.
Hmm.
I have another job as well, but it's good to still have those things that you work long term that gives you the space
Yeah.
to really investigate these stories the way they need to be investigated. But as we're speaking about story, tell us a little bit about your story, the one that you kind of spoke about your video.
So it's actually three pieces. Um, Dorian leaving its indelible mark on the Bahamas 5 years later. September 1st marked 5 years since Dorian came to the Bahamas.
Yeah,
And the two islands, the two northern islands, um, who were impacted the most, the Abacos and Grand Bahama. Um, and it wasn't something that I could put into one piece. So I had spoken to my mentor about um, expanding it into a three-part series. Part one covered the human effect and the toll it took on people from the Abacos. Part two focused on residents of Grand Bahama. Part three focused on the mental residuals. Um, it wasn't an easy write
mm,
um, because of everybody being affected by it. Um, Having to have people dredge those memories back up
yeah,
for those first-hand accounts. Um, I remember my friend Shavante, who was the anchor for all three pieces, because I used her in all of them. It took us a couple of days for her to do that interview, and it got to the point where we couldn't do it in person because she would break down. And so
yeah,
she had to send me videos of herself because she had to go into a quiet space and just take the questions one at a time and have that conversation with herself. Um,
mm,
and because it was to the point where like she was with her mom, her brother, and her son, and they didn't know if they were going to survive.
mm,
The water just kept rising, and they couldn't evacuate. They just had to stay in that house and take all of that. Um, and she has retreated now. Like I've been trying to reach out to her, and I can't reach her. Um, and I know she's okay, but again, I asked her to bring something back that she had spent the last 4.5 years trying to push down and suppress. Um, and so there it this and that was kind of the whole reasoning for writing the pieces. Dorian is gone, but Dorian is still very present.
yeah,
Um, Dorian is still here, and that's the effect of climate change that people don't seem to grasp. It's not a one-off thing. It's not a one-time deal. Hurricanes aren't something that just happen and you keep it moving. I visited Abaco in the last couple of years, and if you go to those islands, everybody's bright and sunny and happy until there is a dark cloud in the sky. And if you're alert to the people around you, you will see everybody get quiet. You will see faces and demeanors change just because it's a trigger. Dark
mm,
clouds are a trigger for these people, and there's nothing you can do except wait for the cloud to pass, wait for those emotions to recalibrate to a sunny day, um, and keep it moving. Um,
yeah,
and it was the same thing with Hiram Lewis, who is actually a former member of parliament for the island of Grand Bahama. And his story, I didn't even get to tell all of it. It barely scratched the surface because him being a member of parliament have came with its own levels of sacrifices because you know he couldn't rebuild until he saw much of his constituency rebuilding. So there was he had to make sure everybody else was okay because that's what you do as someone in power. You make sure everybody else is okay first before you check on yourself, you
yeah,
know? And so his family was still hurting while he was making sure other people got to get back. And a lot of people are still not back to 100% in on those islands. A lot of people aren't back to 50%. You know, they're just making do with what they can. Um, which brings me to the third piece, um, which was titled, they're not okay. And we're not sure if they're ever going to be okay. Dorian
mm,
wasn't a hurricane. Usually, when a hurricane comes through the Bahamas, and the Bahamas is like 100,000 square miles, and you have 2,000 islands, islets, keys, rocks all over. If you take a hurricane from Inagua and go all the way up to the Abacos, it would probably take a full day, maybe 18, 19 hours. It moves fast. Even if it's a Cat 4, Cat 5, it would move fast enough. Everybody would feel it. You get an hour, and then it's gone, and then you're picking up debris and you're moving on. That's not what Dorian did. Dorian came and sat on the Abacos for almost 24 hours.
Oh.
And even though you had 160, 170, 180-mile winds, you also had storm surge, which was 15, 20 feet coming
Mm.
into the mainland. And so you have people whose homes an hour ago, you saw this one-story house on the ground. You now can't even see the roof. The entire house is submerged in water. You
Uh,
are outside, you're inside your house and you're seeing these clips, these Facebook lives coming, and people are showing you outside. Sharks are swimming and circling their homes
that's
because
crazy.
the ocean came in to the island. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but if I see a shark swimming around my house in the middle of the
That's a
day,
bad time. Yeah.
we got we have a problem.
Yeah.
We have a serious problem. And then the water starts coming in because that's the only thing it can do. And then the water starts pushing against you because, again, things built on land aren't built for the pressure of water,
Mhm.
and then you start seeing, you know, Shavante, the one part where she did break down was after the storm, there's a truck coming, and her and her family get on the truck heading back to Marsh Harbor. And she has to put her hands over her son's eyes because while they're driving, they're seeing dead bodies
Yeah.
in water. That's what they're driving through. And she doesn't want her son to see that, but she unfortunately has to. And her brain clicks on to now start looking to see if there's anybody that she knows, you know,
Yeah.
because bodies are bumping up against the truck, and so there's so many different levels of trauma for these people, and you can't expect them to expect it to be, oh, you now have a roof back over your head, you now have lights, electricity, and your job is now back and everything's fine and hunky
It's
dory.
fine. Yeah. Yeah.
That's not how life works. That's not how reality works, and so that third piece again, you know Dr. Juliet Storr, she uh, is doing a really good work, um, reading a documentary titled, you know, Dorian 6, because a lot of people are still of the mind that Dorian surpassed Cat 5 levels, in terms of wind speed and power, um, even though it moved very, very slowly. And that's what made Dorian dangerous. Dorian could have been a Cat 5, and if it had moved at 30 miles an hour, you probably would not have seen the devastation that it did. But Dorian
Happened.
sat
Yeah.
on Abaco for almost 24 hours and then did the same thing on Grand Bahama, a portion of Grand Bahama. And then it moved off. And that is what caused the big issue. That's what caused the life loss. That's what caused the trauma that is still being experienced today, and if you ask the question if they're okay, you will hear people say, oh, Bahamians are resilient, we build, we will do this. But if you get to the core of the matter, when it comes to heart and head, no, they're not okay. And this
Mm.
is the story that needs to be told, and so being able to expose that and get people to understand that even 5 years later, Dorian still has an impact. And it's probably not going to go away, not until this generation is erased, and then it's really history.
Mm.
Um, you know, that's the story that I was trying to tell and hope that at least scratched the surface for other people.
Yeah. No, that's people underestimate, or there's appreciation for that part of it. I think especially in the global north, when the conversation about climate justice comes out of the fact that we produce so much less of what's contributing to
Oh
things
yeah,
that's making these things like the hurricanes worse. Um, their narrative is pretty much devoid of things like this, where yeah, because they could rebuild in a couple months.
their
They're good.
narrative is their narrative is the fairy tale that we live in paradise.
Well, because
But
it's
there's a
because they live
but
in
there's
they live in paradise. They live in a
no
developed country where they can actually
we no
rebuild in a couple months.
we live in paradise to them because they come here to vacation. We live where they go back home to what we consider paradise because they don't pay the price that we pay when their flights get canceled because a storm is coming or their um, cruise gets diverted because a storm is coming. They don't experience that. And
Yeah, it's very
that's the part that the disconnect is happening. I'm pretty sure those persons who unfortunately live in, is it South Carolina right now or North Carolina, that experienced Helen and
I
had
think
those
it's
flash
Florida.
floods. Florida definitely got it, but I
Mm.
think a couple of the northern states got it as well. There was flash flooding there
Oh yeah,
because of Helen.
that's rare.
Um, Having to deal with that because again, what storm was it? I think it was Harvey. Harvey went to Texas, and I had a friend who lived in Texas, in Houston, and when I saw Harvey coming, I told her, "Get out." She was like, "But hurricanes come to y'all all the time." I said, "Yeah, I live on a plateau. The water is going to come over. It's going to stick for a couple hours. It's going to leave. You live in a basin. There's a difference. Get out." Harvey came. She left with her family. Harvey came. They couldn't get in the house for 6 months because that's how long it took the water to recede. And then by the time they could get back into their space, there was mold everywhere. So they had to rip everything out and rebuild. It took her a year and a half to get back into her house. She's like, "That's what you meant when you said the hurricane was coming in Italy." Yeah, hurricanes, hurricanes last for a short period of time, but their impact goes beyond that 2 hours or that 3 hours that
Yeah, for
you feel it,
sure, for
you know?
sure. And I
So,
think even with them, they really have challenges like that. Um, that that they do, but even when they do have those types of challenges, in terms of resources, like
oh yeah,
and
they're
also the
way better.
way they build as well, the way they build is very different to us. So like
Yeah.
it could something like a building that, for instance, a regular person, it took them maybe 5 years to make that building.
Hmm.
A hurricane come and it gone. It got years here. Look, I mean, in our region to replace
Hmm.
that, based on
Yeah.
again the way we build and whatever, the way they build there, they could replace something within like a month. Like
A
they could
month,
have it,
2 months. Yeah.
they could fit it up and then bring it to the place and have it like bring it
Yeah.
fit up. That's how that's how their infrastructure works over there.
Yeah. I think their
Um,
building codes are way less stringent than
yeah,
ours.
yeah, yeah. For good
Yeah.
reason too.
Yeah.
Because we'd be done if we built houses like that. But
Yeah.
it's
No.
also just it's also just to say like they're you know they, that's part of where the disconnect is with them, because you know they can't imagine not being able to get their house back within a couple of months. Meanwhile, you know, and again, it is rare. They do have hurricanes that certain particular parts, mostly the southern region.
Mm-hmm.
And they do have casualties as well. But
Yeah.
in a region like Jamaica, where there is a long storied history of these things
Yep.
happening, it's way different. And
Very.
like you said, sometimes it takes generations for, it takes a generation passing away for that trauma to
To
disappear.
go. Yeah.
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 So it's really serious stuff. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing your perspective, for sharing more about your stories. And we hope to see more from you, more of these stories from you. When people check out what you're doing and, that kind of thing.
Thank you for having me. I think this was a Climate Tracker Caribbean is like a great exercise, not only for journalism, climate journalists, but I think journalists on the whole being able to really get their feet wet with all aspects of journalism, the things that are required for journalists nowadays. Because again, you can't just stay in one space and expect to thrive and
Mm-hmm.
excel in your craft, And I think that's what I'm appreciative for with the fellowship, being able to push me out of my comfort zone, being able to educate me on things with the seminars that I ordinarily would not have even thought, think about, and challenging me on all those different levels. I'm really appreciative of having the opportunity to do it and being able to tell myself at the end of the day, hey, I can make a TikTok. I
Mm-hmm.
can do an IG live. I can make my own videos with CapCut. It's not hard. It's not something that I have to go out and pay somebody else a couple $100 or $1,000 to do. I can do this stuff on my own. And definitely I have help. There's a community of people out there who have resources that I can um, rely on and look toward and help. And in turn, if they need my help, I can do the same. Uh, and so there's a really lovely give and take when it comes to being a part of the fellowship. And I'm really glad that I took that step to actually apply and do it.
Yeah. Yeah, we're glad you did too. We're glad you did too. We're glad to have you. Honored to have you. And yeah, where would you say people can check out what you're doing if you're looking for more followers, if you're looking to tell more stories?
I'm still working that out. My
Mm.
current pieces here locally for the
Mm.
written part are on eyewitnessnews.com,
Yes.
ewnews.com. In my IG live, uh, that sparked a conversation with my guests wanting to do more of those. So we're
Mm.
trying to figure out um, what to call that space to create it.
Yeah.
But I definitely let you guys know once we do create it, because there are a lot of folks here in the environmental space, in the climate change and climate justice space that have their own stories to tell
Yeah.
uh, and can help with educating people on what's going on in our country and in the region. Um, that those stories need to be told as well.
Agreed.
So we're looking at trying to figure out how to best do that. But no, not yet. But
Yeah. Not happen.
when I do, I'll definitely let you guys know.
Happen. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
good. And that's good to hear to that there is the possibility of. But yeah, thank you again, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in. This has been another excellent episode of the Climate Calabash podcast. You can check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts. And then obviously we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok as well, Caribbean Climate Calabash POD, and Climate Tracker Caribbean. Thank you again for tuning in.
Thank you.